Hey everybody, welcome to my rig rundown. Tonight I'm going to talk about just the pedal board. I don't know if I'll have time in the write-up to talk about the rest of my pedals, amps, and guitars. I will show you my primary guitar really quickly though. This is, or at least as much of it as you can see, this is an Epiphone Les Paul Custom in a gorgeous silver burst finish, and it's tuned to drop C, 11 gauge strings if you're that kind of person that wants to know that. The board, everything is mounted to a Pedal Train Metro 16. There's an Eventide Power Max mounted underneath. Everything, including the Power Max, is held down with dual lock and held down well, might I add. The signal chain is as such: Polytune, MXR, phaser, chorus, plumes, son of Pharaoh, BEOD, reverb, ditto, and if I'm running through an amp, I'll just go right out of the ditto tonight, and primarily really I go through the radar, and then right now that's running into a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 3rd gen into my MacBook, which is running GarageBand. If you're into that kind of information, great. If not, I'm sorry, and I hope I didn't bore you. So the philosophy behind the board, I'm mostly a hobbyist. I go out and do open mics every once in a while, so that's the most of my gigging these days. So I didn't want a big board, and I also wanted something that was really flexible, something that I could play a wide variety of genres with, but was still focused primarily on stoner doom. As I said, since I primarily stay at home with this board, I wanted a really good ampless setup. I wanted to sound as good as I could through headphones as I can through an amp. And finally, I wanted simple, straightforward effects, little to no menu diving. Before I go through the pedals one by one, I want to start with the Altoids tin, as that's very important. Inside are my picks, a capo, and a micro Leatherman. If you're the kind of person that wants to know about picks, we have a Dunlop Tortex 60, but for electric guitar, I primarily play these Dunlop Flow 73s. I find them really enjoyable for quick picking, which is somewhat common in faster metal songs. All right, so starting with a Polytune, this is my newest pedal. I had a Polytune 2 before this. One day, a couple months ago, I wanted to compare how I sounded clean through an amp and then through 8 true bypass pedals. And I did hear a noticeable degradation in signal. I'll show you that as an example. Polytune 3 has a buffer in it, so that's why I got it. Right now the buffer is on. I'm gonna play it, I'm gonna strum with the buffer on and then with the buffer off. So if you heard the second time I strummed a little less definition in the higher frequencies, that would be that signal degradation and the reason behind getting the Polytune. I wanted the black one because it looked good with the rest of the board, and aesthetics are really important, okay? And now to the Phase 95. I wanted a good phaser, and this is a good phaser. That's about as I can say. I primarily use it like a faux Univibe. I did have a Univibe, an MXR Univibe before this, but I also wanted to do regular phaser things, and this sort of does both at the same time, especially when set to script 45 for that Univibe-ish sound. And through the neck pickup, it sounds kind of like this. You're gonna have to excuse me for all of my recycled riffs. Again, I play a lot of stoner doom. Next to the Mr. Black chorus. I don't play with chorus much, but it's fun to have every once in a while. So there it is, chilling at the top. I really like the Mr. Black line, as you can tell, because I also have the reverb there. It was a $100 CE1. That's tiny. I mean, what's not to love? It sounds kind of like this. And then if you want to have a ton of leads and get super 80s, you have this. Excuse me, I don't... Sorry about that, I was out of tune there. But you get the idea. It's great for that super 80s sound. Yeah. The reason why I have both of my modulation pedals before drive is I prefer it that way. I think with the phaser after the drive, it's too grainy. Think of John Frusciante's solo in Parallel Universe. I like how that sounds, and Frusciante has a kick-ass solo in that, but it's not the sound that I'm going for. I think the drive pedals really round off some of that grain and it turns into a better throb. With the chorus, I find after the drive pedals that it was too digital for my liking, so I slapped it beforehand because it sounded a little more subtle that way. All right, on to my bread and butter pedals, my drive pedals. My goal here was to have each of these three sound amazing by themselves and also stack well with each other. And I think I've found a wonderful combination here. So I'm going to start with the Plumes. If you don't know what the Plumes is, it's a Tube Screamer clone with a couple of other clipping options built in there. I like to set it to mode 1, that's LED clipping, which is different from a Tube Screamer. If you've played a Tube Screamer through a clean amp, you'll know what I mean. Some of that clean signal sounds like it's mixed in there, and I don't like that really. So mode 1 with LED clipping, it's a little different, and you don't have that issue. Mode 2 is a great clean boost with no diodes, and then mode 3 is your typical Tube Screamer, which works amazing as a Tube Screamer. So with it set now is how I like to keep it, and it sounds like this. Yeah, it's a really great standalone drive sound, and like I said, it stacks really well, which I'll show you later on. Next, we're going to go into the Son of Pharaoh. This is my favorite in a long line of big muffs and other fuzzes. Right now, I have the clipping diode set to germanium, and gain is set to high. Right now with the knob set, I call this companion mode. I think it sounds best when it's stacked into the Friedman or when the Plumes is going into it. With the Plumes and the Son of Pharaoh, I like to kind of use them in conjunction like two-channel amp, you know, the Plumes being like, you know, the low gain sound like this. And then when you want to lay into the fuzz, I think that sounds awesome. The other way I like to set the Son of Pharaoh is on its own. If you turn the drive down, not the drive, if you turn the volume down a little bit, turn the fuzz up all the way, change the clipping diode to silicon, turn the high down, turn the tone up just a little below noon. This, I think, is the best approximation of a big muff. Those of you unfamiliar with the Son of Pharaoh, it's a ram's head big muff, but with a completely different tone stack in there. So it's a big muff and not a big muff at the same time. So here's how it sounds when I want it to sound like a big muff. Sounds kick-ass. Final way, going back to companion mode really quickly, is like I said with the Friedman, with the Pharaoh going into the Friedman. This is when I want to sound like sleep, and it sounds a lot like this. You can riff for hours like that, and I do. Finally, we're going to segue into the Friedman BEOD. You just heard a little bit of that right now. This is the last word in distortion pedals for me, and it's my favorite Marshall in a box. I think it sounds awesome as a distortion pedal into an amp. I just turn the treble down to around 11. When I'm playing ampless, I like to keep the treble up to around 2 o'clock. I think some of the upper mids kind of sneak in there, and that's very favorable. The internal trim pot is set to noon, the way God intended. I did try turning the gain down because this is sort of the best and worst thing about the Friedman. It's got too much gain. So as you can see, I just set the gain down almost all the way. The reason why I keep the trim pot set to noon still is there's still a lot of that sizzle, which I miss at the lower settings. So if I'm using the Friedman by itself, I'll turn it up to like 9 o'clock at the loudest, and it sounds like this. Lots of fun. It sounds like a souped up Marshall, as you would expect. Also, it does work exactly like a Marshall amp should when you put a tube screamer in front of it. So I just set the plumes. I'm actually going to set it to, yeah, I'll set it to mode 3 for now, so it's set like a tube screamer. But this time I'm going to turn the gain back all the way down. I'll let the plumes bring some volume in. All right, I got that pick squeal in perfectly. I was hoping that would go well. All right, yeah, I mean, you can tell it brings a lot of smiles to my face as it is right now. Yeah, so those are my gain pedals. Now to the reverb. Like the chorus, I wanted a simple reverb. I used to have Mr. Black Supermoon Eclipse before this, and it was so awesome, but it took up too much space. The nice thing about the Mr. Black Mini Reverb is that it sounds sort of like a tamer Supermoon instead of a sway knob, and there is a little bit of sway in there, not too much. Instead of that, you have a tone knob, so you go between, you know, like a dark cavernous reverb to a brighter plate kind of reverb. And then also, unlike the regular Supermoon, you have a full wet dry mix. The thing I noticed about reverbs with full wet dry mixes, though, is that, at least for me, I often underestimate how wet I need the reverb to be, and then I drown myself out afterwards. But I think it sounds nice. You've sort of heard how the reverb sounds. I rarely use it on its own, but I will show you how atmospheric you can get. Like I'll turn up some of the knobs, and you can hear how crazy it can be, somewhat. I do miss having tails like I had on the Supermoon. All right, on to the Ditto. This is the oldest pedal on my board, and I consider it the most recommended. This is a pedal I recommend the most on this board to any guitarist, period. Because of any pedal on my board, this one has taught me the most. It has taught me how to keep a rhythm. It's taught me how to harmonize, how to build riffs, and understand that less is more. And that includes gain, which is a lesson I will forever continue need taught. But yeah, I mean, like, you can get a clip-on tuner. Not everybody needs this amount of gain or modulation. This makes you a better guitarist. These make you sound cool. This makes you a better guitarist. I was going to play a little demo according to my notes, but with the board on a table, I won't be able to really loop very successfully. But if you're starting out as a guitarist and you want to get a pedal, get this before anything else, because you'll learn a lot with it. And then finally is the Moore. You've been hearing it the whole time. I use it as an IR loader. I have the power amp off, and the IR that's in here is an Ownhammer Orange PPC 4x12 with Celestian Vintage 30s and creambacks mixed together, and I have it set to the SM57 Fredman combination. If you're into that kind of stuff, there you go. If not, I apologize, but I think if you're still listening to me, you're probably still interested in this stuff anyways. The parametric EQ is on. I have it set with minus 3 dB at 400 hertz per Ownhammer's instructions. Yeah, it's an IR loader. It does the job. I can do 1/4 inch out. There's a headphone jack there as well. It suits my needs perfectly. That's really all I have to say about that. So yeah, that's my board. Some final thoughts. I really love it. I'm at a point right now where I don't see any need to change anything on my board. I mean, no pedal is exactly the best. Like, I could spend gobs more money and probably get a better get a real CE1 or something that sounds like a CE1. I could get the BEOD Deluxe. I could get a Grand Orbiter, etc. A Strymon Iridium, but I don't need those. This, I think, each of these pedals do the best for their value. Some upsides about the board in general. A lot of quality pedals per inch, and with that you have a lot of sounds in a small footprint. I also have every drive sound I could ever want. Again, there's no menu diving. Well, okay, fine, except for the Moore. There's no menu diving. Last year I got an HX Stomp thinking that, I could sell most of my pedals and I'll be fine with that. And I returned it after 3 days because I spent more time futzing with it than playing with it. Even with an application like this, I feel like I'd only use it as an IR loader, and the Moore Radar already gives me that, so there's really no need for it. I like how it sounds ampless. I hope you like how it sounds ampless since you were listening to it this whole time. I like how it sounds through an amp. The dual lock holds down the pedals really well. I can hold the whole board up by the phaser, the polytune, like any of these mini pedals. I'm not kidding. I've done it. I wouldn't recommend it. You know, I have a hand underneath supporting everything, but yeah. It's also really tidy, you know, everything's nice and neat, cables are relatively neat, few components sticking out. You know, my internal neat freak really likes to keep everything tidy. Some downsides with the board, the foot switches are really close to each other. There was this one time at an open mic, I had the Pharaoh and the plumes on. I was going to turn off the Pharaoh, and instead I turned on the Friedman. And I mean, that's a shit ton of gain, and I love it, but it was unnecessary for that time. Another thing that I'm not as big of a fan of is having a second row. Before this board, I had a Nano Plus, but I was running out of space on that board. I did need something a little bigger, hence the Metro 16. With the second row, though, something like the chorus is hard to reach. It's not really easy to show at this angle, but the Pharaoh and the plumes are higher up. You know, once you get to the top of the knobs over here, that's higher up than the top of the foot switch here. And, you know, I really have to like twist my foot around like that to tap it on. Polytune is less of an issue because it's so close to the side, but I mean, yeah, it's an issue. A minor one since I don't use it often, but an issue nonetheless. One thing I've thought of doing to solve that would be like, you know, taking a piece of wood and like not gluing it. I'd probably like just dual lock it, something temporary on top of just this section of the board, and then put the pedals on top of that to kind of raise them a little bit. I've just been too lazy to do that though. Another downside, no hard case. I don't know if that really counts. With the dual lock and how compact this board is, pedals are hard to take off, and everything's also really tight. You can't really, you know, reach between here and here, and you basically have to take the board apart to do things. And finally, for the last part of my video, the Doug score. I was originally going to make this like a crazy Doug DeMuro parody, but I don't have the effort to do that. I don't have the time or effort. But I still had a lot of fun tabulating the Doug score, so I wanted to keep going with that anyways. So we're going to start with a weekend category. First with styling. These are some good looking pedals and it's a neat layout with the colors that go really well. But I've also seen cleaner and neater pedals and an aesthetic theme, you know, colors, brands, meme, and hype pedals. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Acceleration, the ability of going from, now for this I'm going to go with the ability of going from one sound to another. And in that case, I'm going to consider things like I don't have a switcher for my board, so there's a fair amount of tap dancing that can occur sometimes, but these compact board pedals still pack quite a punch, and it'll get a 5 out of 10. Handling, I'm thinking about this in terms of a performance setting. Pedals are held down really well, but the compact space leads to accidental presses, and reaching the chorus is really hard. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Fun factor, I might be biased, but I think it's pretty obvious. It gets a 10 out of 10. Cool factor, as far as pedal boards go, I think it's pretty cool, but there's not a lot going in terms of hype pedals though. I mean, yeah, maybe the plumes, but everybody seems to have a plumes these days, and same goes with the BEOD. Mr. Black Mini line has a cult following, but it's a small one, and also everybody's going ampless. That's not turning heads anywhere. It'll get a 6 out of 10 with a weekend total of 35 out of 50. Now going to the daily category and features, there are lots of sounds in a small space, but it's still a small space. There are no TC tone print pedals or pedals with deeper configurations. Even this form factor, there are options. Chase Bliss is a good one. There's also nothing over the top in terms of effects either. There's no synthesizers, pitch shifters, octaves. I mean, we just have a phaser and a chorus and a reverb if you really want to count that as an effect, per se. But still, the ampless application is nice. And there are tons of drive pedals. I'll give it a 6 out of 10, but that might still be too nice. Comfort, that's a hard one to connect here. At first, I was thinking about the literal comfort of one's bare foot on these stomp switches, and I couldn't think of any better ideas, so we're gonna go with that. Comfort, corners aren't too sharp, but yeah, Boss pedals are much more comfortable to press with bare feet, so it gets a 3 out of 10. Quality, I think we have a lot of quality here. There's an isolated power supply under the board. I've barely mentioned it, but that's a biggie here. That and also these are reliable, trusted brands, and it's neatly laid out, but it's not exactly the cream of the crop. Cream of the crop. So I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. Practicality, this is a small footprint that's very easy to store, and the isolated power supply lends to an easy setup and breakdown. Again, there are a lot of sounds in this small space, and I liken it to like a sporty hatchback. The Altoids tin is also a big plus, and it prevents me from getting another pedal like the Boss synthesizer. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. For value, you can definitely get close to these kinds of sounds if you get something like the Joyo Uzi instead of the BEOD. Any Tube Screamer and Big Muff will do, so would any phaser chorus, etc. But we're just talking about bang for the buck, and I rank that really highly for these pedals. That could be biased, but I think individually and together, there's a lot happening here. I think it's great. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 with a daily total of 32 out of 50 points. And the Doug score is 67 out of 100. There are no pedal boards to compare it to, so we're going to compare it to some cars that got a Doug score of 67. And that includes the Tesla Model 3 Performance, the Bugatti Veyron, and the Lamborghini Aventador SV. So in conclusion, I have the Bugatti Veyron of pedal boards. Thank you very much, and have a good night.